Hello, and thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Paige Thomas. I'm the Senior Program Specialist here with NASHBIT. I wanted to welcome you to today's presentation titled Ending the Silence, a case study in nonprofits' role in addressing youth mental health. Before we begin, we would like to mention that this is a safe and friendly space for positivity and productivity. There are a few housekeeping items I'd like to quickly go over. This presentation is being recorded, and the recording link, the slides, and a letter of attendance will be sent via email to everyone who attended today. This information will also be available on ASTHO's, NAMI's, and NASHBIT's websites and NASHBIT's YouTube channel. Please use the chat pod to share your name and state, ask questions, or share any information with the group that pertains to the presentation. Closed captioning can be viewed by clicking the CC at the bottom of your screen or clicking the link in the chat pod to view in a separate window. We also have an ASL interpreter who is spotlit on everyone's screen. After the presentation ends and you leave this platform, a brief survey will show in your browser. Please take a few moments to share your comments and thoughts about today's presentation. We would like to give a special thanks to SAMHSA for sponsoring this series, and thank you again for joining us. I will now turn this over to Catherine Gilley, our Senior Manager, State Affairs, Government Relations, Policy and Advocacy for the National Alliance on Mental Illness, also known as NAMI. Thank you, Catherine.
Perfect. Thank you, Paige. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today for this SAMHSA-sponsored webinar. We appreciate your time. So today's webinar is the third in a four-part learning series titled Leveraging Different Sectors to Address the Youth Mental Health Crisis. And it's a partnership between NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and ASTHO, the Association of State and Territorial Health Officials. So the previous two webinars focused on the public health and education sectors and how they can influence youth mental health. The recordings for those two webinars are on both of our websites. And our final webinar will be on August 9th, and that will focus on pediatric providers. So registration will be opening next week, so please look out for that. Today, we're going to talk about the role of nonprofits and youth mental health, and we're excited and proud to take a look at a NAMI program called Ending the Silence as a case study in how nonprofits can engage youth in mental health education and conversations. So next slide. Just a quick disclaimer that this is a SAMHSA-sponsored webinar, but the content does not necessarily reflect the views of SAMHSA or HHS. They are the opinions and perspectives of the authors. Next slide. So we'll hear from three wonderful speakers today. Nikki Rashes, who's the Senior Manager, National Program and Training Delivery at NAMI National. Juliana Hicks, Program Manager for Ending the Silence and Family and Friends at NAMI National, and Claudia Hicks, Community Education Coordinator for NAMI Metro Suburban in Illinois. And with that, I will turn it over to our presenters. Thank you. And next slide, please.
Hi, welcome everyone. If you actually want to go back one, we're just going to introduce ourselves a little bit. Thank you. Let's start with Claudia. Do you want to introduce yourself to the group?
Yes. Hi, everybody. My name is Claudia Hicks, and I am the Community Education Coordinator for NAMI Metro Suburban, which is one of the many affiliates in Illinois that works within Cook County and around the western suburbs. And I'm very thankful to be speaking today, and I'm very excited to share some important information and just a little bit about my experience from sharing my story as a young adult speaker.
I will go next. My name is Juliana Hicks. Great to see everybody. I am the Program Manager for Ending the Silence and Family and Friends, another NAMI education program. I will be speaking about more of like database and how the program works nationwide, as well as a couple other fun facts. Good to be here.
Thank you both. And I'm Nikki Rashes. I'm the Senior Manager of National Programs and Training Delivery at NAMI. And my first involvement with NAMI was as a volunteer with a Metro Detroit affiliate about 15 years ago. For 8 years, among other roles, I managed their NAMI Ending the Silence program at that affiliate. I continued with NAMI as a staff member of a suburban Chicago affiliate overseeing their outreach. And eventually, for the last 2 years, I've been part of the staff at NAMI's national organization overseeing the online training programs. And if we could go to the next slide. Thank you. If you're not familiar with NAMI, it stands for the National Alliance on Mental Illness. We're the nation's largest grassroots mental health organization. We provide education, advocacy, support, and public awareness so that all individuals and families affected by mental illness can build better lives. Now, Ending the Silence is a signature NAMI education program. So we'll begin by sharing what Ending the Silence is and how it supports our middle and high school youth. Next slide, please. Ending the Silence was created in response to alarming data, such as on the slide here, which shows the prevalence of serious emotional disturbance in youth. Some of the information gleaned by the National Institute of Health in 2016 included the insight that while 16.5% of youth aged 6 to 17 experienced SED, only 50% of them received treatment. It was also found that suicide is the third leading cause of death in 15 to 24-year-olds. And perhaps the most relevant finding was that 50% of all lifetime mental illness begins by age 14, with 75% by age 24. It became clear to NAMI's mental health advocates and educators that reaching out to youth in that age range was not just a need, it was a responsibility. And when looking at the studies as a whole, the National Institute of Health concluded that early intervention and identification provides better outcomes. So NAMI saw the need to go beyond the in-schools general health curriculums to use lived experience as a guide for educating young people and reducing the stigma surrounding mental health. Next slide, please. NAMI acted on those findings with the creation of Ending the Silence. It is a free, evidence-based 50-minute session designed for middle and high schoolers. With an ETS presentation, the students learn about mental health conditions through a brief presentation, short videos, and personal testimony from a young adult who describes living with SED and their journey to recovery. All of this with the overarching goal of creating a generation of students who are well-positioned to end the silence and stigma surrounding mental illness. And next slide, please. NAMI ETS is a well-researched, evidence-based program. It's been found to be effective in changing middle school students' knowledge and attitudes towards mental health conditions and toward help seeking. It was further found that the effectiveness occurred during different presenters, schools, and across diverse populations. Next slide. So as a bit of history, Ending the Silence was created by 2 NAMI volunteers in DuPage County, Illinois. They presented it in middle schools and high schools throughout DuPage County, and finding it to be effective locally, in 2013, they gifted it to NAMI National in its entirety. NAMI affiliates began presenting ETS throughout the country, compiling data and doing research that allowed ETS to eventually be added to the Registry of Evidence-Based Programs and Practices. Next slide. And these next couple slides will give you an idea of how the look of the program has evolved to remain eye-catching and relevant to our youth. You can see that early on, Ending the Silence was kind of a darker, basic image that the PowerPoint followed. You can also see in 2018, there's an update where it got brighter, more eye-catching. You can also see a slide that was added with the title, People Can Succeed. So this was a very popular addition to the program, showing that living with SED does not mean success is not possible. However, it was problematic in a couple ways. One was that it was difficult to keep celebrity names current so that they were recognizable to youth. The other issue is that while celebrity success is one thing, we found it to be more impactful to our youth to hear from typical average young adults who had experienced mental health conditions. So next slide, please. You can see on the 2021 version here, we've changed this People Can Succeed slide to include 6 actual young adults living with SED, along with a quote about what success means to them and how they achieved it. Now, the biggest change that came about in 2021 was the creation of an Ending the Silence virtual option. This includes a diverse group of young adults sharing facts and personal stories in a very real way. There were also minor changes, such as using more current language. You can see a move from what is mental illness to the slide here that says, what does it mean to have mental health? The virtual format made Ending the Silence accessible to schools where there may not be a NAMI affiliate nearby to present in person. The virtual format is available in English or Spanish. So last year, the most recent update was to the in-person program. It was updated, including or incorporating new facts, statistics, current language for talking about mental health, and is also available in both English and Spanish. Next slide, please. And we want to share just a 30-second video with you. It'll give you a feel for the latest version of ETS.
1 in 6 youth aged 6 to 17 experience a mental health condition each year, and 50% of youth don't get treatment. We want to end the silence so you're not afraid to speak up.
Mental health is health.
Know the signs.
Know you are not alone.
Know that people care.
And that we all have the power to end the silence.
For more resources, you can always go to NAMI.org.
Thank you. And next slide, please. So during this most recent overhaul, a key component was added to Ending the Silence, which took it from being a one-off presentation to being an ongoing resource. So what you're seeing on your screen is what students or teachers might see when they look at the ETS portal after having seen a presentation. So when ETS is presented in a classroom, the teacher and student get access to a passcode. It allows them to log into this portal. And on the portal, students find videos created by young adults. They vary from 3 to 7 minutes long and address additional mental health related topics in more detail. So as you can see, some of those topics include things like trauma, treatment options, how to ask for help, and positive coping skills. In the teacher's portal, there are also suggested lesson plans and supplementary information to help them support the students in their classes. So I'd like to stop here. I'm going to pass the presentation over to Juliana, who will discuss how NAMI, as a nonprofit in communities across the country, is using this program to reach young people and to end the silence about mental health.
Thank you, Nikki. And for the people that missed the introduction, hello, my name is Juliana. I am the program manager for Ending the Silence. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to start off with giving some general data. Ending the Silence is available in 41 states. You can see them in green, pretty busy. There are more than 800 volunteers that have been trained to lead NAMI Ending the Silence as of December 2018. And then over 400,000 participants since 2014. Next slide, please. A little bit more recent data. In 2022, there were 1,287 requests for the in-person presentation nationwide. 93,714 attendees reported nationwide last year. And The latest research as of March 2023 stated that there were 5,970 attendees reported nationwide. With the statistics, there's a couple differences between the in-person presentation and the virtual presentation. As Nikki mentioned before, we did open the virtual presentation as of last year, so a couple more updated numbers. Next slide, please. So the presentation itself, during the presentation, students learn about the signs and symptoms of SED, recovery, coping strategies, how to help friends, how to reduce stigma, and other important topics that can help spread awareness and knowledge of SED. The program provides real-life faces, real-life stories that help high school students and middle school students to learn more efficiently. Students get a rare opportunity to ask questions about SED that are too often surrounded by silence. And in the following slide, I will open up a video. It's two young adults discussing what it was for them to ask for help and their perspectives. Next slide, please.
I think one thing to know about asking help for a mental health concern, just to keep going, keep trying, not to be afraid to be vulnerable. Honestly, I'm really glad that I waited for someone to listen to me.
In my experience personally, it was just really hard to know that all these overwhelming feelings that I was going through were going to be let out into the world. And I don't know how did you feel?
I felt a lot of the same too. I grew up in a sports family, and you know, it's the kind of thing like you fall, you get up, you get back to it. You know, you can't be weak. And especially like in school and academics, like you always tried your hardest and you did your 110%. I was in middle school and I reached out to an adult and I brought her all these pamphlets, and she was like, you're too peppy to be depressed. I don't know what you're talking about. You're just over exaggerating. I felt like then it was just all in my head. Have you ever experienced something like that?
I just didn't know like where to go. When I was growing up, I didn't have a primary care provider. I didn't have a stable access to healthcare. For me, it was like, okay, maybe being able to speak to a trusted adult at my school to then be directed. Not everyone has the answers, and the more support that you have, the more, at least for me, that support system that I started building, I was able to recover, right? I was able to find hope in the situation. When it comes to reaching out for help in my faith community, it's a really positive experience when it's combined, right? Like, yes, I'm going to pray for you. We believe that our faith is going to help us in this situation. But together with that, like hand in hand, let's find the resources. Let's find like professional help, right? And help that is tailored more to like my Spanish speaking community, you know? So I think that was something that if I brought that all together, it was like a beautiful combination for me to be able to be more open to reaching out for help.
Thank you. And as this video mentions, they are speaking about reaching out for a professional or for your school or any adult that can provide that help. We do have two other presentations. One is ending the silence for families and ending the silence for staff members that could help teachers and counselors provide that support for our students. So how it works, it is presented in health, science, or psychology classes, youth groups, clubs, and after school programs. It is delivered by a trained two-person team, one who happens to be a young adult living in recovery. It includes presenter stories, educational videos, educational slides, and a discussion. It provides teens with resources, tools to help themselves, friends, or family members who may experience symptoms of a mental health condition. So ending the silence reduces stigma through education. It provides accurate information about SED to promote understanding and dispel myths. It creates a personal contact, puts a human face to any issues, and provides hope that recovery is possible. It is offered in person and via online videos. The video that we saw, it's part of the online presentation. It has Spanish captioning, Spanish speaking stories, so it can reach more communities. And this also helps to pretty much help to answer some questions. It creates a safe space for the youth to feel comfortable about speaking of something that they might not feel comfortable elsewhere, or might not have the correct wording or the correct knowledge to put thoughts into words. Next slide, please. So speaking of Ending the Silence, the virtual one, it was launched summer of 2022. We are hitting our 1-year anniversary. Woo! It takes the topics of ending the silence in person and presenters exclusively via videos that are only accessible through the Ending the Silence website. It was created because we wanted to reach middle school and high school students across the country, and we recognize that NAMI is not in every single community. We understand the importance of teaching young people about mental health and want to give every teen an opportunity to experience NAMI Ending the Silence, whether it's in person, if it's available, or it's online. Within the first 5 months, 73 presentations were requested and 3,306 individuals were served. As of now, we are still getting a great amount of requests, especially now that school's about to start. So we are happy to provide this resource and provide it to people that might not have it possible to be in person. Next slide, please. And now I'll pass it over to our next speaker, Claudia.
Buddy, so before I get into this data that is on the screen, I'm going to share a little bit about my personal experience. Since mental health, social emotional disturbance are such a personal individual experience, I think it's important to highlight how, you know, the young adult speaker and their story can really impact students, along with just learning the signs and symptoms, the ways to reach out to a trusted adult. I've been with NAMI in the Metro Suburban for about a year now, and I can't really explain. I'm speechless. I'm left in awe seeing the change that is attainable through the work of a young adult speaker specifically. While all NAMI programs are extremely beneficial, the sharing of one's story can really make an impact and allow for a couple of things, which I'll talk about. I never imagined myself being confident enough to share such a vulnerable part of myself with complete strangers. And putting your story out there, being honest with not only yourself, but with others, allows for judgment. But it also can in turn show that judgment is a part of human nature, and we can turn judgment into understanding and compassion for others. I always like to mention to the students that I speak to, I took a public speaking class my senior year of college, and I was the only senior in a class of all freshmen and sophomores. So it was a little embarrassing. And every time I got up to speak, you could see the anxiety radiating out from my body. I would start shaking. I'd start stuttering. I'd start sweating. And now I like to point it out, I do this for a living now. So pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone is so important for personal growth. And being introduced to the idea of recovery is something that I never had before. And NAMI, I was grateful enough that NAMI gave me that opportunity. When I speak to students, I imagine I'm talking to a younger version of myself or my little cousins with this constant instinctive desire to broaden their minds and just connect with them. The young adult portion of Ending the Silence is basically a matter of storytelling. And what I have seen from my experience and research because of my own curiosity is that storytelling gives room for the expansion of two things: empathy and understanding. I like to make the distinction between empathy and sympathy because these two words commonly get confused for one another. Empathy is feeling with another, while sympathy is feeling for another. During the Ending the Silence young adult portion, I talk about the signs and symptoms I experienced within my personal story. But I recall these signs and symptoms being ordinary, everyday, run-of-the-mill experiences because that was my normal. I believed that those patterns were just a matter of my existence as a human, rather than symptoms of a much larger social emotional disturbance or mental health concern. I like to describe my experiences as relatable and exaggerate the importance of seeing mental health on a continuum. Historically, I think speaking, mental health and in general, social emotional disturbances have been viewed as this fixed black or white dilemma in which you either experience or you do not. And as we know today, that's not true. As we know, signs and symptoms can range in all intensity, duration, and frequencies. And until you hear the experiences of another person, all we know is our own experiences. We only know how we felt, what we saw, what we heard. I often ask students questions like, have you ever had a panic attack? And what does it feel like to you? And I love asking this question because the individuals who do answer are very, very open and honest. And each of them share this unique physiological and psychological experience that they have, and they bring it to the conversation. And it allows for all of them to be validated, that just because you experience that means that it's valid, it happened, it was real, and that it matters. I use a lot of self-validation through my reasoning and logic when sharing my story, because it's a way of making sense out of my past. This type of storytelling particularly allows for individuals, and specifically the students that I see in the classrooms, to get really curious about their emotions and why they act the way they do and respond to situations in the way that they do. I often strive to find a common ground when sharing my story, constantly circling back to the concept of humanity, simply put, because in the end, we are all humans living in the same world with a lot happening, and we're all just trying to figure it out. What I've gained through my story and sharing it is a type of personal growth I don't think I could receive from any other experience. I mentioned in my story how I spent so many years of my life feeling trapped by the symptoms I had experienced and the thoughts and feelings I had. And as a teenager, I was never able to express myself, comprehend any of that, because I was busy living it. So sharing my story has given me the opportunity to make up for all the time that I spent keeping quiet and caging myself to protect myself from allowing others to judge me. And I learned throughout recovery that I owe it to myself, and each and every person owes it to themselves to reclaim their experiences, their thoughts, their feelings, and themselves as a whole. Empowered by sharing my story, I have been able to gain a sense of confidence in my recovery that gives me the room and ability to help others experiencing. Retelling and reimagining my experiences after they occurred allows me to see things that I couldn't at the time, realize that I was doing the best with what I had at the time. Sharing my story has been an incredible healing process, not only for myself, but for the relationships that I've lost. And I think the main reason I find storytelling and specifically sharing my recovery story so healing is because I could have really used someone doing that when I was a student in high school. I could have used someone being open and honest and saying, life is hard and it's a lot. So if you're having a hard time, it's okay. So now for the data, I summed up this data from this past school year, and basically our affiliate saw around 5,282 students for Ending the Silence. Both in, that was a mix between junior high and high school. We see 6th grade through 12th. And out of those students, we at NAMI Metro Suburban have a pre and post survey that we like to send out in order to measure how well we are connecting with the students. There's a portion of our survey called the opt-in. And I think this has been probably the best addition to our Ending the Silence program, because we allow students to anonymously opt in to seek help from a social worker. And so we have a question at the end and we'll say, if you'd like to speak to a trusted adult, you can put your name down and we will connect you with that one. And this is shown so well to be an avenue in which children are able to take that first step in recovery. An average for the schools we see, 1 in 15 students request to see an adult. So they say, I would like to speak to a social worker, which is a big deal because primarily the majority of classes we see are usually around 25 students. So we are making a difference, even if it doesn't seem huge. We're opening up that door and allowing that avenue for people to seek extra help. Next slide, please. So these are the questions we have in our pre and post survey. We have in our pre-survey, we ask a few questions and then we ask them in the post survey and measure how much they learned. As you can see, 73% of students learned about mental health before. So this is something that's becoming more standard in social emotional learning. In the beginning of the presentation, only 50% of students knew the early warning signs of mental health conditions. And after the presentation, we see a 34% increase, up to 84% of students knowing those signs and symptoms that are leading to mental health conditions. We also saw a large jump in students identifying where to seek support. So we saw that 24% increase in students saying that if I or myself or a friend, a student, family member were experiencing this, I would know where to go. We saw a 10% increase in the comfortability with students saying that they are okay with talking about their mental health, and that's something we're still really working towards. Along with being able to talk about mental health with friends that are classmates, peers. So as you can see from this data, I look at this and I say, that's great, but what else can we do? Because we can do more. Talking to students about this topic, I have seen a change in their attitudes towards the concept of mental health. They're able to understand this concept of recovery and idea of wellness in a way that was not able to be grasped by a lot of people 10 years ago. It allows for this curiosity about themselves and interactions. And I wanted to share some of the responses because we asked students at the end of our survey, what did you like? What didn't you like? What can we change? And then we asked that opt-in question. And the responses all usually relate towards the young adult speaker saying that they like the story. Some of the most common words or phrases that I find in the survey responses are students reporting feeling safe, appreciating the honesty, the comfortability in the environment when someone's sharing a personal part of themselves, how open and welcoming the spaces, and the validity you receive from hearing someone else's story and maybe relating to, hey, I've experienced that too. A lot of the responses, these specifically were ones that had my name in it, because I wanted to specifically see the impact that I was making, what students thought about me. So some of the responses we received were, I liked when Claudia told the truth of how hard life can be, but no matter what, you should still try. I liked that Claudia has the same mental health condition as I do, and she was brave enough to talk about it. When Claudia talked about her experience, it was nice to hear someone's story that was so similar to mine. I enjoyed how open Claudia was and about something, and how it made me feel very comfortable and close to home. I enjoy how Claudia put herself out there to help us understand what it's like to live with a mental health condition. I enjoyed realizing I'm not alone. And I liked the interaction towards us and willingness to tell her story, because it takes a lot of guts. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions for either me, Nikki, or Juliana about any of the data or anything we had mentioned about the programs. I saw a lot of questions in the comments about how to get started with ending the silence, how to get trained for it. So that's something I think we can all share a little bit about if anyone is curious.
Yeah, actually, before we start, if we want to go to the next slide, I think it is. Yeah, there we go. How to bring ending the silence to your community, but we can talk more to that, of course.
Thank you all so much for this wonderful presentation. Appreciate it. I saw a couple of questions were posted in the chat, but I also have a couple of my own. You know, this learning series, you know, we've been talking about different sectors, and I think nonprofits are really unique in how they can address youth mental health, especially when it comes to stigma. You know, the data that Claudia shared really stood out to me because it seems like more students answer that they, you know, they can learn how to recognize warning signs and know how to reach out to help, but it's still a significantly lower number that say they feel comfortable talking about their own mental health. Can you all, and this is to any of you, can you speak to kind of how you see nonprofits' unique role in, you know, and not just NAMI, but others as well in addressing that stigma?
Yes, I can go ahead and answer this question. So what we do, like you said, they are comfortable talking about it, just not about like themselves. So it is providing that safe first step of this is okay to talk about, even if it's not talking individually, you are having a safe space just to make them begin to feel comfortable, begin to prep them, provide them with the right information, the right vocabulary, just so that they know, even if they're not ready to speak about it, they know what they're feeling, they know how to reach, they know that there are resources available.
I would just add to that with nonprofits, they are in the communities. They are where our youth are at. So being able to create those safe spaces and reach our students where they are is a huge privilege, a huge ability that our nonprofits have to reach our youth in a different way than perhaps in the schools or even through like medical treatment.
No, thank you. That I think that's so important. I know it definitely could have helped me in high school, so I appreciate that. I also want to ask, we've all seen data and reporting and stories that youth mental health has significantly worsened in the past few years. Not that we were doing great before that, but the past few years we've seen definitely an uptick in crises and mental health conditions. Partially due to the pandemic, but also, maybe a recent, wave of legislation targeting LGBTQ plus youth. Have you all had firsthand experiences with that kind of like worsening trend? And if so, how have you responded to it with this Ending the Silence program?
So pandemic speaking, that came the need of Ending the Silence 2.0, the online portion, just to reach those unreached populations. Schools were closing, businesses were closing. We kind of lost the right setting to provide the program. So the online portion really helped a lot to still provide that support, even if it wasn't in person. We do miss the conversations from having a live presenter and a young adult, but we do try to equip the presentation with the right information, with as much Q&A contrast as possible. And we do have a lot more stories, so they can connect to a lot more choices of young adults and their stories that they've lived through.
I can personally speak. I did not work with NAMI during the pandemic. However, our opt-in portion of our survey was an addition made during the pandemic because people within our staff saw that there was a lack of students being able to seek help because the people who usually see those symptoms are teachers or family or peers. And since students were separated from their teachers, they didn't have that connection. And so I see that opt-in portion being, just that tiny step to allow people to have more knowledge about mental health. Also speaking from my experience, the questions from students, the amount of students that come up to me after a presentation and ask questions, personal questions, or questions about coping skills or intrusive thoughts. And I see this kind of broadening in the younger generations being curious about mental health and their social emotional disturbances rather than judging it. We present Ending the Silence to a lot of sixth graders just to give them that SEL curriculum to start when they get into junior high. And I love sharing my story with sixth graders because they have such great questions and they're so incredibly honest about things that later in their life they'll probably say, I don't think I should have said that to the entire class, but I'll have students say, oh, that happens to me all the time. Like, or have you ever experienced this? Is this something I should be worried about? Is this something that leads to mental health conditions? Is that a symptom? So along that, I see, you know, generationally, we are taking a step each year with those younger students being able to accept it as a reality.
Wonderful, thank you. We do have a few questions in the chat that I'll read out, but also if anyone would like to go off mute, go on camera to ask a question, please raise your hand, and we'll be happy to call on you and give you those permissions. So Darius asked, how can I get trained to present Ending the Silence as an example to teachers in schools?
So with that, we do have Ending the Silence for staff. You can get trained with that. As the slide says, you can bring Ending the Silence to your community. You can get recommended to train by a state program director or Ending the Silence affiliate program coordinator. So you can reach out, say you're interested, and they can have you set up.
Perfect, thank you. And then Michelle also asked if the Ending the Silence for staff and for families are available online as well, or if it's just the one for students that's available virtually.
That's a really good question, actually. It came up this week as well. So we do not have it online as of now, but we are in the process of updating the families Ending the Silence. We are updating the whole program. We are just going to do it individually. We finish Ending the Silence to students in person and online. So now we're moving on to the families presentation.
Wonderful. And then Delia asked, what about the option of students speaking to another peer, another young adult peer after, I think maybe she means after the presentation, you know, if they come up to you afterward to say that they do need help, but they want to speak to someone like you, someone like the presenter or another young adult, you know, struggling. Oh, sorry, Delia, I see you have your hand raised. Do you want to clarify? I think Kayla here will help take you off mute, maybe.
Yes, I was trying to, just to clarify, there's the option to speak to a social worker as a certified peer and a member of also the NAMI peer support community. Sometimes it's easier in the first steps to speak to a peer, and there are youth peers. So I was just wondering if that was an option, because it may seem more daunting to a child, the thought of speaking to a social worker, than maybe a youth peer like Claudia.
Yeah, thank you for that question, because as a certified recovery support specialist, I absolutely value the importance of peers in these discussions. And I think if a school has that service available, I think it's amazing. And I would love to see our youth be able to talk to other peers. At the same time, typically when an Ending the Silence presentation ends, our young adult speaker, and usually the older or the main presenter as well, will stick around in the classroom for a few minutes. When I was presenting Ending the Silence, those were probably the most powerful moments, when the children or youth were switching classes and the young person would come up to me and say, I'm really scared. My girlfriend seems like something's really wrong and I don't know who to go to. I don't know where to find help. And those are the times where, without being an official peer support session, those peers can guide them to someone who can help them if there aren't peers available through that school system.
Yeah, thank you, Delia, for the question, and Nikki for answering that. And it brings to mind another question I I work on our policy and advocacy team, and so I always come at that with the lens. When students, and this question is for all of you as well, but when students do come up after the presentation and say, they would like help, or ask to be directed toward resources, what kinds of barriers do you face in getting them help? Like, what kind of gaps do you see, and maybe what would be helpful at the policy level to knock down some of those barriers?
Personally speaking, I have found this to be one of the barriers within my role as a young adult speaker, is that there is this experience where you go into a classroom, connect with these students, and then you don't see them until maybe next semester or next year for another program. And the idea of having RSSs, CRSSs in schools, I think is amazing, and something we at NAMI National, all our NAMI should kind of look into, because there is that difference, especially with younger students feeling more comfortable with someone closer in age to speak to someone else. I've seen some barriers that are almost institutionally constructed. Some of the students that come up to me after the presentation will say, well, I need help, but I don't like my social worker. And the school will have very strict rules where they cannot switch and see a different social worker. Or they will say, well, I want help, but I haven't talked to my parents about this, and I don't want them getting involved. There is also just a lack of youth resources compared to adult resources in the realm of mental health and social emotional disturbances, because of HIPAA laws and the having to, them being a child, having it to be a professional experience. So I do see a lot of barriers, but personally, when we share resources, we kind of give them everything we got so that they can pick and choose, because a lot of times there are those little hindrances that pop up that we can't really jump over or go around. So we'll just have to take a different path.
One thing I've always really liked in the presentation too is that there is a section when it's talking about reaching out to a trusted adult, where it says you can ask a trusted adult for help and keep asking. So it gives our young people that permission that if that first person isn't the person who can help them, if there is that barrier, it gives them the opening of the door to keep asking for help, to keep searching until they find someone who can and will help them.
Thank you for answering that. And I just another follow-up question, because I love the young adults as peers, I think is so huge, and it sounds like that really resonates with middle and high school students. How can and I apologize if this is going a little bit beyond the scope, but how can a young adult who is a peer, or I'm sorry, a young adult with lived experience, how can they become, a peer? How can they get involved in peer support? And I apologize if that's outside the scope, so please let me know.
I can take that one. So if a young adult wants to get involved, as a whole, NAMI typically takes our volunteers beginning at 18 years old. So as they're coming out of high school, they can begin giving back to those middle and high school students. But I have seen when I was working with affiliates, young adults who set up fundraisers, young adults who set up teams for NAMI walks. There are so many ways they can begin to advocate. NAMI is reinvigorating right now our NAMI on Campus program, which will be starting in high schools as well as colleges. So that is somewhere that our young people can get involved as well. Just becoming a champion for the cause, whether it's reaching out to your local affiliate or through someone at your school, finding that community. And I would love if Claudia would take a second to tell us about NAMI Metro Suburban's newest resource, because I think it's amazing for peers who want to get some support.
Yes, I was going to mention that in the last question, but I was like, oh, wait until it's relevant. Very relevant. NAMI Metro Suburban recently in March opened the Loft at 8 Corners, which is the first quote unquote living room for teenagers. So we take students from the ages of 15 to 18. I believe once they graduate 8th grade, they're automatically eligible to come to the Loft. We are personally working really closely with the high schools and middle schools in Cook County and in the western suburbs to make sure that these schools know that the Loft is a resource. The Loft at 8 Corners is kind of what you think a hub for teen mental health would be in, best case scenario. It is a great place. They have numerous amounts of groups, almost support groups. They have workshops. We have clinicians on staff. We partnered with Pillars Community Health. And so when someone comes in, they can just walk around and take a look and relax. Or if you're coming in for something more emergent, you will be screened by a clinician from Pillars, and then making sure that you don't need any external help from another facility. You are introduced to a CRSS. All of our CRSSs at the Loft are under the age of 30. So they do a really good job of making sure that it's accessible for those young people to come in and feel, like it's their generation's home. It's a place where their people of their age have this ability to be seen and heard, despite anything going on in their lives. So it really is a great resource. If anyone is interested in more resources for the Loft, I'm happy to share them with you. So yeah, or any questions about it.
And just to piggyback off that or clarify, the CRSS that Claudia is referring to is a Certified Recovery Support Specialist, which is the Illinois version of a CPRS. So if anyone's not familiar with that acronym, it does go back to the peer support that we were talking about with Delia's question previously.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Claudia, if you wouldn't mind posting if there's a website link with that information in the chat, that would be great. So we're at time, but I just thank you all so much. It was a wonderful presentation. Thank you for all the work you're doing. And then thank you everyone who joined as well today. Appreciate you joining us. Just a reminder, we do have a final webinar in this series, promoting integration of care, the role of pediatric providers in youth mental health. And we're excited that'll feature the board presidents of both the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American Association of Child and Adolescent Psychiatrists. So we'll send out, that'll be August 9th from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern time, and we'll send out a registration link soon. So Paige, do you have any final remarks?
I didn't have anything specific except for thanking everybody for joining us today. Again, thanking SAMHSA and NAMI, all of our presenters. It was a really amazing conversation. There will be a survey that'll pop up at the end of your screen, on your screen at the end of the webinar. But other than that, we are good to go. Thank you all for joining us, and have a great rest of your week. And we hope to see you at the next webinar in the series. Thank you.